What up, perps? K-Copia's back in effect. Purple State Party. You know what we're doing here? We're repping America, the center, and common sense. You know, I hope a lot of grinders are out there listening to this, hearing my voice, because that's who I'm standing with, man. I'm standing with the people who do the work, the people who put it in every single day, Much love to you. Got a good show this week. Looking forward to it, so let's get it rolling. Rolling. All right, so this week is G. Letter G. G2 to be exact. Second go around. The first time I did G, I really wanted to cover this particular thing, but I just didn't get enough information, didn't have enough examples. I want to bring you a good product. You know what I'm saying? But the G this week is Goodhart's law. It states when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. This is a law that was not a law like a legal law, but a law, like a rule, like the law of gravity, let's say. It was proposed by an economist named Charles Goodheart back in 1975. Ooh, what a good year, I was still single digits then. But it was in an article about UK monetary policy. And, it's just the basic explanation of it is when a system is designed to optimize a specific metric, individuals or teams may find ways to game the system to hit the target, even if it means distorting the underlying reality the metric was supposed to measure. So what does that mean? Let's put that in simpler terms. A company that rewards employees based on the number of customer calls they handle may see agents rushing through calls to increase their count, leading to poor customer service. If that sounds like an AI explanation, it is. I use AI to help simplify things sometimes. Here's another one. This is the one to me that really stands out. The classic Cobra effect. Way back when the British government had a bounty for dead cobras in India. They used to rule India. Cobra's pretty poisonous. They get everywhere, real dangerous. So they put a bounty on dead cobras, which led people to breeding cobras for the reward. Ultimately, it increased the population of cobras when the program was canceled. Now, why is that important in politics or here at Purple State? Well, I'll tell you why. See, we have in California and other places around the country, schools are pressured to graduate more kids. They want a higher percentage of kids graduating. But what they end up with is unqualified kids who then go on to get massive college debt and flunk out of college because they were never prepared. Look around the country. We've covered it before in California, Baltimore, places where entire school districts are not reading at grade level. They're not writing at grade level. They're not doing math at grade level. When you dumb down the system, you end up graduating more people, but they're not better, right? So looking at the examples that the AI gave us, instead of how many calls employees make during the day, how about how many sales they make or customer feedback? How many people get 5-star reviews from customers, when they're handling an issue or making a sale? We look at the Cobra effect, right? We have a similar situation in Florida. Dumbasses who got big-ass pythons, they outgrow their tanks. They can't afford a bigger tank. They release them into the Everglades. Nothing naturally hunts these pythons. So the pythons grow and grow and grow, and they take out endangered species. They've even been known to take out Florida panthers, right? So what does Florida do? They have a one-day event where everybody goes out into the swamps, and whoever brings back the most dead pythons wins the reward. But you can't show up with dead pythons. So you can't breed pythons, kill them, and then bring them to this event. I suppose you could, but breeding pythons up to a relatively good size is quite hard work, and they don't let you bring them in. You start with an empty slate, and you go out and you hunt pythons. And at the end of the day, they help remove pythons, right? You've achieved your goal because your metric wasn't simply how many can you bring in. It was how many can you hunt in that one day. You see, it's a minor difference. When it comes to politicians, especially the left, because right now, I have my grievances with the right, like a lot of people, but my grievances are really with the left right now because of the way they're running the overall game. See, I could nitpick Trump about this or that, but there's also things that I like that he's doing, right? But I don't see that coming out of the left. And right now, the left's Goodheart, metric is I fight Trump. It's true. Look at what's going on right now. Gavi in California is spending $250 million plus that we don't have to fight Trump, to fight Texas. Chuck Schumer is in a fight for his life because he has to go up against AOC, right? So he wants to shut down the government. He wants to then blame the Republicans, blame Trump to show that he is fighting Trump. Meanwhile, Trump's just trying to shrink government and reduce the budget. Well, amazing. Well, that would be great if we could do that. Shrink the government a little bit, trim some of the fat out of the budget. That would be awesome. Who wouldn't want to do that? Who doesn't have a household budget right now that you wish you could trim some fat on? To find that like extra $20 a month or $10 a week or whatever it is by canceling a service or by buying this instead of that. We're all looking to save money, right? Portland is suing to stop the National Guard from coming in, to protect federal agents who are enforcing immigration laws. You might disagree with their tactics, but again, some of that goes back to the state doesn't help. The local law enforcement doesn't help. So ICE has to act the fool because they have a mandate to get them. And you see, this falls into Goodhart's law. They want to arrest as many illegal migrants as possible. But the state isn't pointing them in the right direction. And the cities aren't pointing them in the right direction. So they have to go to Home Depot. Looking at Gavi here in California, right? Instead of letting Texas just look bad on their own, right? We show them that we can do it better, in other words. Instead of simply fighting Trump, fighting Texas, fighting the Republicans, Gavi could be sitting back saying, look, California's not gerrymandered. I mean, it might be a little bit here and there, but I'm not going to argue that point. California is set up somewhat fair, an independent commission. We can argue all those little points, but for the most part, California votes Democrat because a lot of Democrats live here. Okay, cool. We don't need to dick around with the maps. We don't need to do that. In Portland, use the National Guard. Look at some of the cities where you're lacking officers, districts where you're lacking officers. Where could ICE and federal authorities use maybe some undercover operations to kind of clean up some of the drug-infested streets, right? We should be looking for politicians that can say, I can work with Trump. See, I can work with both sides. I want Republicans to do the same thing. If the Democrats have a good idea, I don't want it getting kneecapped simply because it came from the Democrats. That's fucking stupid. I'm purple. I want the best from both sides, but I don't want the bad stuff. One of the things that it's frustrating to me because the politicians are supposed to be working for us. Let's take for example here. Let's say that you open up a restaurant and you hire a chef, right? But instead of cooking, the chef spends all day trashing other restaurants online. Was that the job that you hired her for? To simply badmouth other restaurants? Or did you hire her to cook food in your restaurant? Do you expect that employee to simply cook the best damn food in town? And that's how you win the war? In other words, with politicians, are your ideas so good that we'll vote for you? Or we'll agree with you, or we'll side with you, or we'll jump the fence to come over onto your side because your ideas are freaking brilliant. And I'm not saying that politicians, Chicago, Portland, LA, California, that they have to agree 100% with Trump. They don't. I mean, if Trump tried to ban gay marriage, I would stand against him. If the Republicans wanted to outlaw abortion on a national level, I would stand against them. I'm going to stand with the people who are doing the good job, The employees who are putting out the good ideas, that's who I'm going to keep. I'm going to fire the employees who are lazy and try to say, well, look, I wrote an online post bad-mouthing the competitor. I don't care about that. I want to beat my competitors because my product, my ideas are better. Is that really too much to ask? I don't think so. You know, every Sunday I start looking at the news to see what's coming up in the show. And one of the interesting things about what I do is that during the week, my focus changes. You know, I originally thought I'd be focusing on the government shutdown. You know, that's a G. Or maybe peace in the Middle East, you know, which is something that I really believe in. I don't understand why Muslims and non-Muslims have to have such beef. You know, one side really needs to check itself, but we're not going to get into that. Because what happened was a disgusting human being popped up again on my radar. She's leading the Democratic side for the governorship of California. And I'm talking about that piece of crap, Katie Porter. You have never met a more self-centered, entitled waste of space than this lady. She has no merit running for governor. She is an awful human being. She claims to be a victim of domestic violence, and yet she's the one who commits the domestic violence. In divorce papers that have resurfaced, her then husband talked about getting hot mashed potatoes, burning hot mashed potatoes poured on his head, throwing toys at her, books and other objects at her. When he filed a restraining order from his rage-prone spouse, he claimed that she would routinely call him a fucking idiot and fucking incompetent. She smashed a glass coffee pot when she didn't think the house was clean enough. Hoffman, her former husband, says, she would not let me have a cell phone because she said, you're too fucking dumb to operate it. Yeah. When she would get mad, Hoffman went on to say, she would claw and scratch her arms and then say to me, look what you made me do. She would routinely say that he was a horrible parent in front of the kids. And recently, the kids began spitting at me, throwing their food at me, claiming that I'm a bad daddy. You know? Stretching all the way back to 2006 with the mashed potatoes. She poured a ceramic bowl of steaming hot potatoes on his head, burning his scalp, yelling, can't you read the fucking instructions? Yeah, that's what 10 years of marriage was like with her. You know? She is the Ellen DeGeneres of politics. You know, she has taken out her frustrations on her own staff, constantly yelling at her. Yelling at them. And recently, on Monday, she was doing an interview with CBS reporter Julie Watts. And, Julie Watts asked her, what do you say to the 40% of California voters who you'll need in order to win who voted for Trump? Porter says, I don't need them. Yeah, that's the quiet part out loud. She doesn't give a shit about the rural areas, the Republicans, the conservatives. She doesn't give a shit about that. Watts went on to ask her, so how are you going to win the 60% then of the Democrats? And Porter just assumed, well, they're Democrats, so they're going to vote for me. And so there was more pushback, at which point Porter tried to cut the interview, removed her microphone, and said, I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to call it. Yeah. Julie Watts said, Miss Porter, I'm an investigative reporter. You've never had a conversation with a reporter? These were the same questions that were being asked of all of the governor candidates. You know, how are you going to win the 40% of Trump voters? How are you going to win the other 60%? But no, Porter stormed off. Is that really what we want running our country? Let's listen to one of her competitors, former state controller Betty Yee. Katie Porter is weak, self-destructive. Let me start over. Betty Yee says, Katie Porter is a weak, self-destructive candidate, unfit to lead California. The stakes are simply too high for her to stay in this race. Yeah. That's from her own people. Yeah, it's a competitor. But it's true. It's true. We don't need more self-entitled politicians. We don't need that. I don't care what side of the aisle comes out of this, okay? I really don't care. If it's going to be a Democrat running California, I want it to be somebody better than Gavin Newsom, Gabby, right? I want somebody who is going to lean a little towards the center. I want somebody who doesn't expect the vote. Is that too much to ask? I don't know. We'll find out. So in the whole Goodhart's law, the metric of we fight Trump, we fight the Republicans, let's look at Chicago. Instead of working with ICE to make it go smoothly, they fight against ICE being there. For some reason, the city leaders and the state leaders of Chicago and Illinois, they seem to want to protect illegal immigrants. They don't want ICE there arresting them. That's kind of weird. It's kind of weird considering, a fair percentage of those are criminals, people who have fled their homelands to here. But, they found a computer-aided dispatch message, okay? Fox News did, that flat out said do not respond to help from ICE. ICE was blocked in by vehicles, okay? Instead of opening fire on people, they were trying to disperse the crowd. They called for the local law enforcement to come and help them. They were virtually ignored until a woman showed up with a gun that was shot. The police then came and started to assist them. But is Chicago some sort of paradise? Well, no. During that same period of time, there were 22 shootings, 4 murders. Okay? Of those 22 shootings, it resulted in 29 victims and 4 murder cases. Some of the victims that were shot, a 16-year-old was shot in the hand. They might not ever be able to use that hand again. A 62-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman were both shot in the legs while sitting in a garage. Who knows what kind of long-term suffering they're going to have because of that. The government shows up, the federal government shows up, and instead of working with them, let's think about this. You're offered the assistance of the federal government, but you want to reject it because it's not coming from the right letter. That's the thing. An R is sending troops to your D city, so you have to reject it. That's really good. And not only do you have to reject it, you have to call it Trump's invasion. So Trump sends federal troops there, or federal agents there, to round up illegal immigrants, right? Then he needs to back it up with the National Guard because somebody needs to protect these agents and these federal buildings. And the governor of Illinois is like, no, you can't do that. Let them burn the federal buildings down because I'm fighting Trump. And all of his people go, yay, you're fighting Trump. Well, there was a headline, an opinion piece that sums it up really good. In Chicago's killing fields, activists cry about Trump while families bury kids. They went as so far as the Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson signed an ICE-free zone on city-owned property, prohibiting its use for federal immigration enforcement. Wow. So they want to go there, round up illegal immigrants. Instead of helping them, facilitating them, trying to make it a little bit better, pointing them in the right direction. You don't think Chicago police and detectives know where there's high concentrations of possibly criminal illegals? They know where the illegal brothels are. They know where the sex trafficking is happening. They know where the drug dealing is happening. But instead of pointing them in that direction, they turn their back on ICE and then cry when ICE just has to go out and try to find people. But to pass a law saying that city and state properties can't be used by the federal government, that's step one to a civil war. You want to fight? The federal government? Fine. I'm all for that. Fight the federal government when they're wrong. But when all they're trying to do is clean up your streets, it's a bit bizarre, I would say. That's just me. I would say that's a bit bizarre. Hopefully people agree with me. So this next story really hits home for me because 30-something years ago, I was given a choice between a prison sentence and rehab. I was put into a diversionary program. Thank God, saved my life. Saved my life. No two ways about it. Saved my life. Thank God that judge hammered me on that and said, look, you either go to prison or you go to rehab. Boy, I thank him every day, man. But now we're going to talk about what happens when you don't really do that. When you want to play these foo-foo, lefty, liberal, Marxist ways of dealing with criminals. We're going to look at this criminal, this Mr. Troy McAllister. Right now, he is in court, and they are asking for a diversion. Well, sounds like something I'd support, right? No. 91 felonies this guy has. And now he's responsible for 2 deaths. He was out on parole in 2020 when he allegedly drove a stolen car while intoxicated, fueled up on methamphetamines after stealing a cash register and a laptop from a sandwich shop. He drove right through a red light and killed 2 people. Hanko Abe, 27, and Elizabeth Platt, 60. His lawyer is asking for diversion now. 91 felonies later. This guy was out on parole one time. He served 5 years in county jail for robbing a market with an airsoft gun. While he was out on parole, he was arrested for stealing cars, bashing down the door of an apartment building, claiming the owner gave him permission to use drugs there, and for jumping into a car and trying to rob somebody until the person got out of the car and ran off. In all 3 of those instances, the district attorney's office of San Francisco never formally filed charges. So he was let go on parole. Parole meaning, look, if you don't act right and fly straight, you're going back to prison. He's like, F that, I'm just going to do crimes. And San Francisco said, maybe next time. 91 times. That's why I attack the left the way I do. What a bad idea to keep giving them chances, to ignore the fact that they're on parole. Now, 2 people are dead. This guy should have been buried under a prison a long time ago, not out stealing laptops and running people over. He stole a cash register and a laptop and killed 2 people. Because the left says, no, we have unlimited chances to give criminals. Even if they completely prove themselves to be bad people, there's still a good person inside. Think about that. They want to believe that everybody is good and that the system has let them down, where they will overlook people like this. 91 different arrests. I don't think I even got to double-digit arrest, and I decided to clean up. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with holding people accountable? What's wrong with giving people a chance, 1 or 2 chances, to straighten up and fly straight, or you just bury them under a prison. And before you say we'll run out of prisons, then let's build more prisons. Let's stop building a fucking bullet train to nowhere and build more prisons. Simple solution. Do I wish we didn't need prisons? Sure, I wished everybody that there weren't criminals out there, but that's never going to happen. These people are just bad people. They're wired wrong. Lots of people are wired wrong out there. I suffer from all kinds of mental things, man. I'm wired wrong. My daughter's wired wrong. My wife's wired wrong. We're all wired wrong. I don't know who's normal anymore. But when it comes to criminals, some of them are not ever going to rehabilitate. Rehabilitation, recidivism, and all of those run about a 30% success rate. About 30% of the people who get out of jail go on the straight and narrow. About 30% of the people who go through rehab stay sober. Those are just facts. We need to look at the facts. If the Democrats want to show some leniency here and there, cool, whatever. I think that's fair. That's what saved my ass. All right? I'm cool with that. But I didn't have 91 arrests to prove that I was a bad person. All right? And that's what we need to end. That's why I'm afraid of Democrats winning in California, because I see what they do. You know, Thomas Sowell says that when you come up against these liberal arguments, there's 3 questions you need to ask. Compared to what? At what cost? And at what evidence? And when it comes to things like the criminals, Look at the cost. 2 people lost their lives because nobody did this. The evidence is that this guy was going to commit more and more crimes. And compared to what? Compared to me. When I got into trouble and the courts had had enough of me, they set a mandate. I had to follow the mandate, and thank God I did. So, Gavin Newsom, he just signed a bill that gave 800,000 Uber and Lyft drivers in California the right to unionize. Now, you might say, oh, goody, now the Uber drivers are going to get paid more. They're going to get paid. No, they're not. Okay, you know what's going to happen? They are going to pay union dues, and some fat cat white dudes are going to get rich running the union, taking the money, donating it to the Democrat Gabby's causes, right? And the cost of Uber is going to skyrocket. Drivers will not be making as much money. There'll be more and more restrictions put into place. But as long as they pay their union dues, all's good for Gabby and the union leaders. But what's really going to happen is that drunk driving is going to start to rise because people will no longer be able to afford Uber. It's already getting more and more expensive. When they unionize and they start demanding a bigger share of the pie, Uber could just pull out of California. If it's not profitable, they'll just pull out. We've seen companies do it, okay? But those are the unintended consequences that these people should see. I'm all for workers' rights. I really am. But I also understand that unions are a double-edged sword. That union leaders will get rich, costs will go up. And that's not always a good thing. Simply having costs go up so that the drivers theoretically can make more. Look what happened when they passed the $20 fast food law. There are less workers at these stores. I don't give a shit what statistics people want to throw around, okay? I go and I see less people at these restaurants, okay? In my local area, I think staffing's pretty good because there's a lot of money around here. So, it doesn't, they weren't hit as much by the rising costs. But when I go to places that are not in this area, I see it. I see 1 or 2 people working there. There's nobody, and it's not better for the workers. It's not better for the workers because as less people want to drive for Uber, Uber drivers are going to get pushed to take more and more drives, right? So pretty soon, Uber's going to be like, yeah, you're no longer independent. You're no longer setting your own schedule. You're going to work for us and you're going to go where we tell you to go. Destroying the whole idea of this being your side hustle when they start demanding that, hey, if you want to get paid, you're going to need to start covering these shifts. So you're going to end up with, women having to go out in the middle of the night and pick up random strangers. And then they say, this isn't worth it anymore. And so the drivers, less Ubers, higher cost, more people are going to be like, I'll just drive home. I can make it. And drunk driving goes up. Because let's be honest, Uber is one of the reasons why drunk driving is going down. Because why drive drunk when you can just call an Uber? But if that $8 Uber ride or that $10 Uber ride is now going to cost you $20, you might start thinking twice about it. But that's all I ask. Look at what you're doing. What is the end result? But for Gavin Newsom, it's all about Gavin Newsom. Another union to give him money. That's all it is. It's not about the workers because Gavin Newsom doesn't give a shit about any of you. Katie Porter stated it unequivocally. She doesn't care about 40% of California. All right. And so the 60% that she does care about, I'm sure 30% of those she doesn't care about either. In fact, I'm willing to bet that Katie Porter doesn't give a shit about anybody in California other than Katie Porter. Gavin Newsom only cares about Gavin Newsom. You could say the same thing about Trump, but unfortunately the evidence isn't there for you to say it. So before you say it, get it out of your mouth. So, CBS. CBS staffers have received new marching orders, urged to treat Democrats and Republicans equally. They want less partisan division because it's starting to hurt their business. When you alienate, you could simplify this and say you alienate 50% of the audience, but there are a lot of Democrats. I meet them every day. People who voted for Biden, people who voted for Kamala Harris, people who voted for Gavin Newsom, who are tired of the far left element of the Democrat Party. They've grown to regret voting for Democrats, right? So CBS, by being super partisan, might be losing 70% of their audience because they're just tired of it. They want to know the truth. They want to know, like, for example, like we were talking about, Gavin Newsom's bill to allow Uber to unionize. What does that really mean? That's not just a triumph for Gavin and Uber drivers. What does that mean? What are the pros? What are the cons? People want to see that. People tune into things like CBS Nightly News to get the pros and the cons so they can make up their own mind. People are waking up to the fact that the media and the politicians are no longer comfortable with us making up our own minds. That's the problem I have. That's why Purple State exists. If you're going to be purple, I want you to be purple. I want you to state that you're purple. When people talk to you about politics, I want you to be respectful of the ideas you disagree with. I want you to keep your explanations short, to the point. Get away from the rhetoric and remind them that you're purple. That you're purple. I meet people. I met somebody. Well, I didn't meet them, but I was talking with somebody last week, and they were shocked by the fact that I said I was purple. They're like, "Oh, I've always said I'm left center or right center." No, purple, because we don't hold to either one side. We're taking what's good from each side and putting it together into one cohesive party. Purple State. But Purple State is not about violence and arguments. Purple State is about simply just trying to get facts out there, both sides out there. Look, if you think that unionizing Uber is a good thing, fine, cool, let's talk about it. I don't mind. I see the cons outweighing the pros, but maybe there's a pro that I don't know about. I'm not going to close my mind off simply because somebody is not living in my echo chamber. Let me make it clear. Purple State has no echo chamber. We are ever evolving. As individuals and as a group, we need to always be evolving so that we get the best ideas out there. So we do things in the most logical, meaningful ways. That's all I'm asking. I refuse to believe that that's naive. I believe that that is exactly what our founding fathers wanted. Would George Washington be purple? I don't know. What about Jefferson or Franklin? I don't know. But from what they put down on paper, I think this country was not supposed to be red and blue. This country was supposed to be purple. I'm Kid Copious. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding. Hold your head up high because, man, you are the chosen people. The people who work. The people who put in the grind for themselves and their families. That's who I respect. Peace, y'all, and never forget, when it really gets too much, just dance it out.